Yes, welcome back. ACCC Chairman Rod Sims has issued a warning to Australia's business sector against misleading M&A activity.
Indeed. Sims says mergers will continue to be blocked if companies aren't upfront about the impact of big business deals on consumers. Well, for more, I spoke to the Australian Sydney reporter, Michael Rodden. Michael Rodden, thank you for joining us. Now, Rod Sims spoke this week, and I think he was probably the most unpopular speaker at a mergers conference in Sydney. What did he say?
Yes, he was at a mergers conference with a bunch of investment bankers in Sydney, and basically he's been banging this drum on for a couple of months now about how the mergers test in Australia is too weak and the courts don't come at these tests from the right angle. So the ACCC is bogged down in a landmark case. It's TPG and Vodafone looking to merge, and the courts, according to Sims, the courts don't approach these things by accepting, basically a well-understood fact that mergers in heavily concentrated markets will result in higher prices. And that's a global anomaly. The US approaches these things just, taking it at face value that, yes, more concentration will lead to a lack of competition and higher prices for consumers.
Also this week, there was a very interesting freedom of information request to Treasury that was released. I understand it was yours. Now, it said something about the superannuation guarantee going from 9 to 12. Does it seem like Treasury is not in favour of that policy based on your FOI?
Well, it's interesting. There's a lot of things happening here. And so the Grattan Institute, the independent think tank, a couple of months ago put out a big report saying, or telling government not to increase the superannuation guarantee from 9.5% to 12%. The way it justified that was by saying that, if you look at the projections, 1 in every $10 of your wages going into this system will give you roughly 90% of your pre-retirement income in retirement. So that's really generous, above the OECD guidelines of about 70%. And according to these FOIs that I put into Treasury last week, their own modelling, which is confidential and hasn't been released, showed that in some instances retirees were collecting more than 100% of their pre-retirement income. So it's sort of just adding to this momentum for the rate to be stalled at 10%, say, which would be a nice round number, because every sort of percentage increase, more money going into the system, is a cost to the budget. On balance, we spend more on foregone revenue from tax concessions than we save in the amount of age pension that we're going to hand out to retirees.
Now, speaking of revenue, the Parliamentary Budget Office this week released their annual 10-year forecasts for both expenses and also receipts. What was the major message out of that?
Well, it's interesting, and basically the independent budget watchdog does this every year. It puts out the projections, and basically the message for government was that the numbers that you've got in your forward estimates aren't looking too healthy, but that the surpluses that the government's banking on over the coming years are mostly, ironically, about greater income from personal tax. And so, we've got, on the one hand, a government selling this message that, they're for the working, they're putting more money back into the pockets of workers, that it's the biggest tax cuts in generations sort of things. But actually, for lower middle income workers with incomes below 58 grand, actually, they're propping up the budget with bracket creep. Average tax rates are going to be something like 4% higher over the decade, feeding into extra government revenue to help prop up the improving budget outline.
The government does say, though, that it's doing a pretty good job on the expense side of things. Expense growth has been a lot lower. I mean, do they at least deserve some credit for that?
Yeah, no, and that's been a lot of hard work and, very unpopular to keep a lid on these sort of spending programs. They've tightened up eligibility for a lot of welfare. And they've also had some help from, low wages growth, because every time the government has to look at, increasing the pension, it's tied to the male wage index, and they've been basically flat forever. So that's helped them as well. But there has been some, political cost in keeping a lid on these programs.
And just finally to the business world, Latitude Financial, how lucky is the CEO, Ahmed Fahour? Yeah,
well, this week, with the prospectus coming out for Latitude, the consumer lease company, or consumer lending, I should say, Ahmed Fahour stood to make something like $50 million if there was a successful IPO at the range it's going to be floated at. And, he is the chief executive who was sort of had to leave Australia Post under a cloud of absurdly high pay. And he's a former NAB banker as well, who made quite a good meal at his time at the bank there. But he's obviously just coming into a lot of luck with each next job.
And those salary details, they emerged in the same week that Phil Lowe, the RBA governor, said that they weren't such a sensible thing, these sorts of salaries.
Well, yeah, Phil Lowe, who's been telling Australian workers to go and bug their boss for a pay raise, said that CEOs shouldn't get bonuses just for showing up. They should be, very stringently applied for, outperformance and things like that. And I think if Ahmed was measured against performance of Latitude, it's a booming business selling small loans to consumers. But in a post-Royal Commission environment, there's a lot of focus on consumer lending and consumer insurance. That's one of the biggest issues in the UK, which is a $100 billion remediation program going on there. So I would say to Ahmed, if you are trying to make those targets, be careful in this space, because it's catching the attention of the regulators.
Okay, Michael Rodden, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.